How about me pushing the right one? That'll work. Welcome to the committee meeting this morning, Budget and Fiscal Oversight. We have two bills we're going to hear. Chairman Scoggins, would you open us in a word of prayer? What number are you?
I'm 29. That's my age. Yeah. Y'all bow with me, please. Our most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity we have to be here today to do the work for the people of the state of Georgia. Be with us, lead us, and guide us throughout the whole day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. We're going to get started today with Chairman Dolezal and Senate Bill 28. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for indulging us over the 2 or 3 weeks we've tried to hear this bill, and something always seemed to pop up, and even today we had to move the meeting up to get it in, and we appreciate you working with us.
Chairman, it is the season for schedule craziness, so I understand. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your help perfecting this bill and the conversations we've had over the last few weeks.
Let me interrupt you and just
sure.
we do have as my problem here. We do have a sub, and it's you'll be presenting from the sub, and it is LC 550591S. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, the committee got that last Friday, so go ahead. Sorry about that.
Great.
Go ahead.
No, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for that. And this sub comes about after feedback both from yourself and some members of your committee, and I will highlight the changes that we made in that. But before I do that, I'll walk through really the 5 core elements of what this bill does. It is a meatier bill, so hope you'll indulge me the opportunity to at least highlight what it does. This is the red tape rollback bill that comes out of the Lieutenant Governor's office, and really is a follow-up to a similar bill that we had last year, but with some feedback from members of both chambers, we have revised this and bring it back as a product for this year. The first thing the bill does is it changes the number of employees for a small business from 100 to 300. The reason that we do that is in existing Georgia code, the code instructs agencies to look for opportunities to limit the restrictions on small businesses in particular. And so we wanted to expand the amount of businesses that were captured in their consideration, in which they are looking at ways to ease the manner in which these small businesses would comply with Georgia code. We introduced something called the Small Business Impact Analysis, which I would say is akin to a fiscal note, and that is something that can be requested by members of the General Assembly on a proposed bill to ask the department to look at how that proposed bill would impact small businesses. We introduced something as well called an economic impact analysis. And an economic impact analysis is exclusive to rules that an agency anticipates will cost more than $1 million over 5 years to comply with. And those economic impact analyses trigger a separate set of scrutiny by the General Assembly. And essentially it requires the ratification of the General Assembly by a 2/3 vote or a majority vote of both chambers that would be signed by the governor. So it essentially makes those larger impact rules be passed similar to an existing piece of legislation. I'm sorry for the microphone here. Currently, Mr. Chairman, as you know, committees have a process by which they can object to agency rules that are made during the off session. A committee of a House under the Administrative Procedures Act or the Senate can object to a rule, and that rule is then stayed until session, by which then we come back and we get with the agencies, and there's a process by which that rule can be adjudicated. We make a couple of changes in this bill to that and really increase the responsibility of the General Assembly in the case of rules that are objected to. Those rules are deemed, if a standing committee objects to the rules, by a 2/3 vote. So we actually raise the bar of objection. But should a standing committee by a 2/3 vote object to the rule, that rule is deemed essentially to be moot. The agency then has the option to declare that they will, at the start of the General Assembly, seek to have that rule approved, and then that rule goes through the process of needing to be approved by similarly 2/3 of the General Assembly or a majority and signed by the governor. The last thing that the bill does, and this is in the tail section, the tail end of the bill, is it introduces essentially a 4-year spring cleaning process for all agencies covered in the bill. And you'll see a separate section of the bill that deals with constitutional officers, which is one change that we dealt with, one change we made based on feedback from last year. Assuming that a committee does not reduce their rules by 10%, which if they do reduce their rules by 10%, they are exempt from this process. But if they do reduce their rules by 10%, if they do not, then they're required to essentially look at their rules and ask a number of questions. One, does this rule meet the purpose for which it was originally intended? Because we, as you know, have a number of rules that are decades old that may not be applicable in today's environment. And is that rule implemented in such a way that it is the least restrictive way possible to accomplish the goal? And that is essentially what that section of the bill does. We have seen laws very similar to this passed in Florida, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Kansas. There's a number of states that are looking to do that. These laws go all the way back to 2010 in Florida, and the past couple of years in Wisconsin, Kansas, and Indiana. Mr. Chairman, I would like to highlight for the committee, if I can, the changes that are in the sub. The first change that is in the sub is really placed throughout the bill, but the first example of this you'll find on lines 54 and 55. And that just adds the chairman of this committee, the chairwoman of this committee, or the chairperson of the Senate Government Oversight Committee, which is currently chaired by Senator Harbin, who's in the room, to receive these impact analysis. And then we essentially insert your committee and the Senate equivalent committee throughout the bill in terms of who will be receiving copies of either economic impact analysis or the small business analysis. The second significant change, Mr. Chairman, is on line 123, and I actually think that we should consider an amendment to this because Ledge Council did not exactly implement this the way that we discussed. What we're intending to do here is to exempt from the economic impact analysis any rule that comes about because of federal law. And it's a little clunky the way that it was written because it, I think, inadvertently completely exempts the Department of Revenue. But this was done with an eye towards the Department of Revenue with the recognition that DOR in particular has a large number of regs that they have to implement every year, every couple years based on federal law. I would, at the appropriate time, have a suggestion of how we can tweak that. But then you'll see on line 128 and 129 the words, or if the proposed rule is mandated by federal law. That is also new in the sub. Other than that, this bill is presented to you as it passed the Senate. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Do we have any questions? Number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the discussion we're about to have, because I do have a number of questions, and because it is a significant change, so I'll limit mine so others can get theirs as well. But the request of this analysis of the cost, when would that be done? Because I'm trying to find it here, but I know in an earlier version, any member could ask for a request, like similar to a fiscal note.
So there's two different things here, and this does get a little confusing. There's the small business impact analysis,
yes,
which a member can ask for outside of session, or there's a limited number that can be asked for during session. That would be very similar to a fiscal note. So that can be requested either prior to or during session. There's some different considerations in the bill as to the response time. And then we restrict it during session just so the state auditor does not get overwhelmed with providing those reports. So think of that like a fiscal note, but for small business impact on the rules.
Okay, thank you. And let me stop you there.
That
is my understanding. Now, fiscal notes, my understanding is if you're a returning member of the General Assembly, you have until October 31st. Unless you're a chairman, you can ask for it during session. So if we were going to have that in there, I would suggest that we make it similar to fiscal notes where you have to ask for it before a certain date. Like I can't ask for a fiscal note right now if I wanted to. I would have to go to the chairman of the committee to prevent that overload. So I would say we make them consistent if that's your desire, which it sounds like it is.
Well, I'm telling you this is a cousin to a fiscal note. Fiscal notes are automatically generated in session for bills having a fiscal impact. It is not, there's not as clear of a line between a bill that would have a fiscal impact versus a bill that would impact a small business. And so we put that as not an automatic trigger in the bill, but as a requested element in the bill. We do not have a deadline in the bill other than the start of session and the or being outside of
Correct,
session.
but my point is if we're trying to streamline government, what we're doing right now is allowing 236 members to have the privilege that only a few chairmen do right now. And so if we do that, that is a significant increase in government, which I don't think is the intent. So I would ask that we make it consistent. Otherwise, I would like to see a fiscal note on this bill because it will have a significant impact on state revenues. So it's one or the other, in my understanding. And I'll let you answer that.
I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying. When we're outside of session, you are able to request a fiscal note as a member of the General Assembly.
Up until October 31st, that is correct.
Correct. In this bill, we limit that outside of session for non-chairmen to 3 requests. So this is actually more limited than what a current fiscal note is, because you can, if you'd like to, request 10 fiscal notes on 10 bills that you write. You cannot do that under this bill. So I would actually argue that outside of the dates that you're talking about, this bill is more limited in its ability for General Assembly members to kind of flood the system.
And that is a fair argument. With that point, I would ask for a fiscal note to determine that the state auditor, and I'm a CPA by trade, so we're talking numbers, I get excited. I can tell you this is going to cost more money, being a business person myself, that if I asked an accountant to develop, if I asked the whole company to let that accountant do reports when I'm the only person that can do it right now, it is going to be a significant cost. So I just don't know how this does not cost more money. But with that said, I do have another question. Is there a reason we don't use the SBA definition of small business, which is 500? I mean, yeah. I'm sorry.
Finish up if you can. It's
Yeah,
been
that's it.
changed.
That's
It's
the
been
two
changed from
questions.
it's been changed from 500 to 300. But
Well, it's changed from 100 to 300, right?
Our bill changes it from 100 to 300.
Yeah,
that's
I'm
correct.
saying SBA, I think, defines it as 500. Is there a reason we don't make it consistent?
I wouldn't be opposed to that change if that's something that was agreeable to the committee.
I thought SBA had changed. Out of my ignorance, I thought they had changed from 500 to 300 recently. But we've got several questions, and not to interrupt the gentleman, but we'll move on, and maybe we'll have time for a second round. Y'all apologize if I didn't get these in the order, but I tried to. Number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing the bill. On lines 125 and 126, where we talk about proposed rules that impact federal assistance coming to Georgia, understanding that is exempted, but are we also exempting the 4-year review statutory requirement with regulations that pertain to federal rules as well?
No, we still have. I think that would be a pretty perfunctory process in the 4-year review process, that you'd be able to check those boxes very quickly, that A, these are still relevant, and B, this is the least restrictive way to do it. I, again, have a desire to retweak the way that 123 to 126 is written, but the intent there is to do what you're talking about, Mr. Chairman, which is to reduce, not require an economic impact analysis for rules that are brought about by federal mandate, essentially.
Right. One follow-up, Mr. Chairman? Sure, go ahead. Just in terms of practicality, if we have, we'll take House Bill 167, which allows for pink to be worn while hunters are hunting. We pass that bill, the governor signs it, goes into effect. If regulations are allowed to be permitted or to be published twice a year, July and December, federal law says, okay, or state law says, okay, you can wear pink while hunting. The department has not gotten the regulations published yet. How do we reconcile the difference between those two, where state law is, and whether or not the department's been able to publish regulation relating to that?
Yeah, you're referencing something I didn't talk about, so thank you for highlighting that. We're moving in the bill as well, essentially, to dates of effect for new regulations. And so you bring up a good question that I haven't honestly fully contemplated. I believe, I don't know that in the pink, I don't know what the regs look like for the pink hunting camouflage. But certainly I would hope that we could have that where it would align, and maybe we look at a change of the dates I'm looking for my notes here to point you all to where that is in the bill. If you'll give me a second, I'll find that for you.
Just trying to make sure that state law versus what's been
Correct.
implemented, so we don't get, our constituency's not caught between a catch-22 with whatever, I just use that as an example.
Yeah, I certainly understand that. So July 1st, which is, is a date that a lot of bills, law goes into effect, is one date that we have in here. Then January 1st is the other effective date.
Right.
So I think that we may find some natural alignment on that already.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Number 29.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, thank you for the bill. Have you heard any concerns from any other agencies about the bill? If so, who are they?
So DOR came to us after the bill passed the Senate and brought up this federal rule question, and we made the change to accommodate them. This is a bill we've been working on for a few years and have not heard agency pushback on it that I'm aware of since the bill passed this year. I think largely because we've been able to work through some of the things with them, both over the off session and last session as well.
Okay, thank you for the bill.
Number 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, a couple questions. This bill has been talked about as seeking to encourage efficiency in government. I have to say in my reading, unfortunately, it adds an additional significant layer of time and bureaucracy. So I have a couple questions for you as we think about this and the impact of this across the state. One, has a fiscal note for this bill been requested?
No. I wouldn't even know how you would go about attempting to calculate a fiscal note for a bill like this.
I think, which is really my point, exactly that. It's enormous, impacting more than 150 agencies across the state, and essentially rolling back all rules and regulations and starting over with every single one of these agencies in our state every 4 years. So I'm curious to know, when you say you haven't gotten pushback, have you talked with the departments and the agencies, and what kind of feedback have you gotten about the amount of staff and money that would be required to implement these types of every 4-year reorganizational efforts?
So I would back up a step and say that I don't know what the cost is, nor that you'd be able to get a fiscal note for following the current Administrative Procedures Act. And that is something that is baked into the culture of these agencies. And this falls under the Administrative Procedures Act. So this is an element of the APA that I have not heard the agencies crying uncle, nor have I seen a single member of the General Assembly bring forward a bill to repeal the APA. While I certainly understand your point that this is requiring agencies and government employees to go through a process of evaluating their rules and regulations, it's with an eye towards making compliance with those easier for people trying to do business in the state. So it shifts a burden. The goal here is to shift the burden of compliance and compliance away from the citizens of the state of Georgia and ensure the government is efficient. And I don't know how you make government more efficient without forcing government to look inward and analyze the things that they are doing. So like I mentioned earlier, we have had, I can't name to you every agency that we have talked to, every agency that has reached out, but we have certainly had numerous conversations through the drafting of this bill, both with the people that would be conducting the small business analysis as well as various agencies that have had certain commentary throughout it.
And if the chairman would allow, just a follow-on question to that. How many agencies, and can you name some agencies that you have talked with, and what kinds of conversations have they shared with you in doing so about the level of effort and what would be required to implement this? And I guess one of the things that I hear you saying is it's impossible to account for the level of impact, which is ironic because isn't that exactly essentially what you're asking every single agency in the state of Georgia to do? And yet we're not willing to do it on the front end to understand the long-term strategic impact. And while I also understand the emphasis on business, Georgia is by every measure the friendliest state in the entire country to do business. So I'm wondering, as you think about that, certainly there are efficiencies I'm sure that we could be looking for in a laser-like way in every single agency. But what is the balance for delivery of services for our people, especially when we start thinking of things about related to health, education, environment? It seems like this is a pendulum swing in the far direction of exclusively geared to business efficiencies and not a good balance of protection of our constituents.
I caught all of what you said, that I can respond to all of it necessarily, but I would actually disagree that by every measure, we have the highest corporate income tax in the Southeast. And so I think right there is a high bar that we have to overcome when we're competing for business, because when business is looking to either stay or leave the state of Georgia, directly to our north and south, they have some pretty attractive offers of other places to go in terms of both regulatory environments and taxation environments. Now, it is true that Georgia and the Southeast as a whole, compared to other areas of the country, does enjoy lower regulatory environment and lower corporate taxes. However, I would say that when you look at the surrounding states, I would agree that we are a great place to do business. This is looking to ensure that we do that. But this is not only, rules don't only impact businesses. Rules of agencies impact citizens. And I hear your level of concern for the government employees and their requirement to adhere to looking at their rules every 4 years. And I understand that. But when I balance that with our actual constituents and the people that we are serving, I'm going to, and I think you may as well, but I'm always going to err on the side of placing more of a burden on the agencies to make sure that regulations are easier for citizens and businesses to adhere to than I am going to, I guess, overly concern myself with. To answer your first question that I recall, OPB, DOA, DOR are the most recent conversations that we've had, but again, this has been a 3-year project, and I certainly don't remember all of the conversations that we've had.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me, please do not ring back in on the second question till everybody has, and I'm not saying you have, and I want everybody to be heard, but we could sit here all day and we will sit here for an hour, and we'll let you talk all we want to, but please don't just continue to ask and I am being critical, but not being critical. This is your committee. I happen to be the chair, but it is your committee. Don't give us a 2-minute run-along question. Ask your question. My point, I see this bill. I'm going to interject myself from a personal matter. I see this bill as when we first came in here, I told you we were assigned a job in this committee. Has nothing to do with this bill. This bill was dropped a week before February the 4th when I sat here and told you guys that when I pointed a finger, I had 3 pointing back at me. I see this bill as a set of guardrails to see what we're doing and see if we've done wrong in the past and to make sure we do right in the future, and we double check to make sure what we did was right. Now, I could sit here and say, Mr. Whip, Mr. Chairman, have you done a fiscal note to know what it's costing us now before we've done anything? And I'm not being critical. But again, I am being critical because I told you I'm an equal opportunity basher, and I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat. Let's vet this bill, ask any question you want to, but we could go on back and forth. What I say about doing a fiscal note to see how much it's costing us before we do anything is just as valid as saying after. Each time we do one, we will see what it's costing this state. And we have to have regulations, and if it's good and 2/3 vote on some of these things, say we need to do it, then that's what we'll do. But you asked any question you want to, and I apologize, and I appreciate you indulging me. And again, I'm trying to go in order here, but number 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. So you already acknowledged that there's already a current process in place to audit current rules and regulations. There was an example.
I never acknowledged that, actually.
Well, you said earlier in your presentation that there is already a process to ensure that we can get rid of rules. And there's actually an example about a decade ago where a certain agency created a rule with outside of legislation and the General Assembly was able to stop it.
So if I can respond to that, there's 2 separate things we're talking about here.
Yes.
One is the objection process for the House or the Senate standing committees to object to a rule.
Right.
That is not an audit. So we introduced this audit process, I'm colloquially calling a spring cleaning. So I referenced that, yes, there is currently a process by which the General Assembly has the option to object to rules.
And is that process not enough? Why is that process not enough? If you're already able to, like I said, the example I mentioned 10 years ago, they were able to stop a rule that was created by the agency. Why is that not enough? Why do you need this process?
Which process are you referring to?
The one in this bill.
Well, there's multiple processes in the bill. Which one are you referring to?
Why do we need essentially the audit process that you're prescribing in this bill?
Okay, so that's
every
the
4
confusion.
years.
The every 4-year audit is completely separate from the objection process. So I'll talk about why we want to change the objection process, then I'll talk about
Yes.
why we need
Okay.
the audit process, if that's fair. We're actually raising the bar on the objection process to require a 2/3 vote of the standing committee. So we're making it harder than it was 10 years ago. But what we are saying therein is that if 2/3, which I think about every committee would require a bipartisan vote. So could actually make the argument that what this bill is doing is empowering the minority party. That if it rises to the level of a 2/3 vote, that is then deemed to be void, as opposed to automatically pushing it to the next session of the General Assembly. So that's a piece of what we're doing.
Yeah,
here.
but it also adds that every representative can do up to 3 rules, right?
No, that's a different section of the bill as well. You're referencing the small business impact analysis.
Yes.
So there's essentially 5 things in this bill that are kind of traveling together, really, that are independent, largely independent of each other. The objection process is completely independent. It doesn't interplay with either the every 4-year audit, and it doesn't interplay with the small business impact analysis. They're completely separate. Did I answer your question about why I'm looking to? It's really just a tweak in kind of what should the result be for the General Assembly, which in my purview. Go ahead.
Well, my question was, if we already have an objection process, why do we need to add an audit process? Like, why do we need to audit every single rule and regulation that we have if we already have an objection process for specific rules to have a more targeted and
Sure.
nuanced approach to
So
it?
the objection process deals with only new rules,
Yes.
right? There is not currently an objection process for a rule that's 25 years old.
Except for creating legislation, correct?
You could come in here and pass a bill
Yes.
on a one-off to try to micromanage these agencies. What the bill actually is doing is placing the power in the hands of the agencies as it relates to the audit, who in some cases are going to certainly understand the nuances of compliance better than you and I do, because it's their full-time job.
Right.
So it allows the agency it requires the agency to do this internal review, which when we discussed this on the Senate side, somebody asked a member in the who's actually opposed to the bill, who's a business owner, well, don't you look at the processes of your business at least once a year? He said, no, I look at it every day.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking these agencies to look at it once every 4 years. And so I certainly think that all of us would say that's a best practice in any area of life that we're managing, and we're putting that best practice on what I would say is a non-onerous cadence to the agencies.
I mean, you did mention micromanaging agencies. I would argue that this bill micromanages agencies to oblivion. I don't think any business worth their salt would ever do an audit process to the point where you're auditing themselves to oblivion, to the point where we're auditing ourselves more than we're actually doing the work that we're set out to do for these agencies, which is what this bill would do.
I'm not sure can you help me understand how you come to that conclusion? How
Well,
once every 4 years?
Do you know how many rules and regulations we have in the state of Georgia?
Yeah, actually, we have that number, and the amount that the regulatory burden has grown. I don't have it off the tip of my tongue. I want to say 150,000 lines of.
Yeah, so every 4 years, having to look at a quarter of those sounds like an extremely, extremely burdensome, bureaucratic, and expensive process that is being added a burden to these agencies instead of actually doing the work to implement these regulations that we already are doing. We already are doing the work of looking at and analyzing these regulations when we create the legislation for them. And if there's a specific rule or regulation that you'd want to get rid of, that's fine. That's why we have legislative powers to do so. But instead of doing that, we're creating this arbitrary process where there's rules that could be repealed based off bureaucracy in this bill instead of the actual reason, instead of actually doing it for the reason that it should be, which is if a rule is bad or not. So I don't think that this is the right way to go about this, doing every single rule every 4 years. We should have a targeted and nuanced approach, because I agree there are some rules and regulations that need to be updated. That's why we have a legislative process, to go through this in a regular constitutional fashion. Do you really think that this process is more efficient and not more expensive?
I'll come back to one of the comments, and I'll answer that. You said that we pass laws for regulation. That's not always the way regulation comes about.
Right.
We have far more regulations that came about as a result of a meeting in an office with unelected bureaucrats, most of which whom our constituents don't even know their name, than we do laws that we actually pass. So I want to make sure we're not conflating laws and regulations, because they're two very, very different things. Part of what this bill looks to do is restore power to the General Assembly that is inherent in is a plenary power in the Constitution.
Right.
And I'm sure that you're like me, and part of what you enjoyed the most about your job is when somebody's having a licensing issue and they call you and you're able to call the agency and get that moved quickly, right? So they know to call you because they know who you are.
Right.
But they don't know who Jim Smith is in some back office of some agency somewhere that is the person that for whatever reason didn't get to their license. And so to the extent that we're the ones getting those phone calls, we should be the ones that have a voice in that matter. So that's what the one piece does. Will I tell you that it is not any more work under this bill than it is today? I'm not going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you I don't think these agencies are going through their existing laws with a fine-tooth comb with an eye towards making life easier on Georgia citizens. I'm not telling you they're intentionally making it more difficult, but what I am telling you is that naturally, if left unchecked, government layers itself on top of each other. And so then what you have 20 years later is a rule that sits on top of a rule that sits on top of a rule that may be in conflict with itself. And so that's what we're looking to change. We're looking to have this introspective process led by the agencies that allows them to ensure that their agency is best serving the people that they're working so hard to serve.
That's quite enough. I want to, out of due respect, I respect all of you guys very much. Ask the question. Don't sit there and ask the presenter what he thinks or don't you think. Ask him a question and let him answer it. And I apologize, but this is an important bill. We've been trying to hear it for 3 weeks. And I want everybody to ask the question, but please do not continue. Ask the question, let him answer it, and then one follow-up. And don't ask him what he thinks or don't you think. Please. So, we've talked about demanding things, requesting things, and strongly suggesting. So that's a request. And so number 28.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to ask a question. I appreciate, Chairman, you bringing this bill. And, one of the things that's gotten us to this point is I think we always have to be looking for efficiencies and waste in anything, whether it's in our own businesses, in this government. And so this is a great conversation to have to make us continue to think about all of this. But I do want to ask a question about, you may have addressed it a minute ago. This is more of a clarification. Is it still in this bill that OPB has to turn around an economic impact analysis within 10 days during the session?
During the session, yes.
Okay, just wanted to check. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it, and thank you, Senator. On bottom of page 13, top of 14, it talks about the ratification process by the General Assembly and then going to the governor. And I guess kind of the big question to me is, if it's not ratified, what happens?
If it's not ratified, it doesn't become a rule. Now, keep in mind, these are only for the rules that the department determines will cost more than $1 million to implement, to comply with. Florida has had this in place for the last 14 years, and it is, I believe, less than one. Some of the advocates have this exact number. It is a single-digit percentage of rules in Florida that have had to go through this process in over the last decade and a half.
And one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So I guess the $1 million plateau, how did we arrive at that? Are there a lot of areas that might be even higher than that, or how do we arrive at $1 million?
So that's a number that other states have used. I will tell you the same thing I told the committee in the Senate. That's not a number that I'm married to. And if it's the wisdom of this committee to change that to a different number, I'd be certainly open to that conversation. But that's somewhat become a common number in states that have implemented or are looking to implement similar legislation. But there's no magic calculation on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this bill. One thing that I've noticed, like you talking about layering, and I think a lot of people here hadn't God, I feel old saying this, hadn't been here that long, so they don't understand. If you look at the last part of every bill, it talks about that the department will promulgate rules and regulations. And you'll find out sometimes, after being here for a while, they use the word legislative intent. So you may have a bill and the department puts it in place, but they didn't put it in place the way you wanted them to because they read legislative intent, or they use that word whenever they don't really want to do what you want to sometimes, and they put it in place. And this right here, by having the departments go through, would kind of eliminate some of these issues that we've had where they conflict with each other, or they didn't put the rule in place the way the legislation was originally written. Is that not correct?
I would agree with that, yes.
And I appreciate you bringing this bill, and I know, like you talked about earlier, we all have problems with people getting licensed and that stuff, and it always upsets me a little bit that they'll call for 6 months, and then we make one phone call, and all of a sudden it gets done. They should have that agency should have that same respect for that person that's calling to try to get something done. And I feel bad for them whenever they do that. But thank you.
Number 24.
Yay, finally. If my microphone will, I thank you, Senator, for bringing the bill. I really appreciate it. Now, whenever, I think it really goes to the self-serving nature of bureaucracies. So often they make rules, and it's for their benefit, to make their lives easier, not necessarily to make the customer, the citizens, or a constituents' lives easier. So I really appreciate that. How will this impact? A lot of times we pass a bill and an agency will say there's no economic impact, we can do it with existing staff, and yet the next session we're going through the appropriations process and they need 10 new people to do what they said they could do with existing staff last year. I've been on appropriations for almost 10 years now, and that happens very frequently. Is there anything in the bill that will combat that?
No, there's not. The quintessential example for that for me, I think then Senator Au and I both voted, and you all probably did too, a raw milk bill. And when we voted on the raw milk bill, little did I know I was placing a multi-million-dollar burden on the citizens of the state of Georgia. But sure enough, the next year there was the appropriation to comply with the raw milk code. If anything, I thought I was deregulating and making life easier, and then the next thing I know, here's this multi-million-dollar expense. There's not anything in the bill that would address that, and I'm not even sure the best way to address it, other than we've really got to think about and ask the right questions, which y'all are doing today before we do pass pieces of legislation.
Mr. Chair, can I follow up just one quick question? How does this comport with I know probably about 14 years ago we passed, I wasn't here then, I almost was, but a lot of people were talking about the sunset provision. There was a sunset bill. Charlize, I think maybe you remember and could speak to that, but there was a sunset bill, and we also went through zero-based budgeting. So I'm wondering how these two bills kind of mirror each other, or are they separate, or anything like that?
I'm not familiar with the sunset provision, so I can't speak to that. Zero-based budgeting is this idea that on some sort of regular frequency, you should go back and reestablish the existence of everything that exists. And so I would say that similar to that, this adopts a similar, at least mentality, that says to these agencies, once every 4 years, so once every 1,200 days, we're going to ask you to go back through and look at your rules and make sure that they're accomplishing the goals in the least burdensome way possible. And if they are, great. And if they're not, please look for ways to make sure that they do. That's all that we're doing.
Who's number 25? Please don't push the button if you already asked a question until we call for a second round. Number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing the bill. I do want to touch first on something you said about regulations being made by bureaucrats in back rooms, and I just want to clarify that it's not just that. I mean, there is an open to the public notice and comment period that is quite cumbersome that accompanies the promulgation of rules. Isn't that right?
Under the APA, that's correct. Yes, sure. So to the political nuts, I should say not nuts, what's the word, with the sycophants that are following that kind of thing, I'm sure that they are aware, but that's a pretty inside baseball process. And I know that for my constituents, most of them are busy earning a living, and they're not necessarily driving down to the Capitol to opine on a rule that they happen to see on some state website somewhere that's coming at some point in the future.
Well, certainly stakeholders would be aware of those people that have stakes in what the agencies are doing and have the opportunity to provide comment and feedback when the 30-day, 60-day process is taking place. Isn't that right?
I think those that have lobbyists and have the ability to do that, I know that for my small business, we don't have a person in our office that's tracking what state regs may come down the pipe that impact us.
Well, for legislation, we invite people to come to the Capitol and testify here on bills that they think are important or that they have a stake in, and we wouldn't consider eliminating that process, would we? We find value in that, right?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, I agree with that.
Okay. So let's talk about the $1 million threshold for ratification, if you don't mind, because the way I read the bill, it's not simply a $1 million threshold, it's $1 million over the period of 5 years.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
So it seems to be less than $1 million. I don't know if you'd look at it as $200,000 per year, or how you would interpret it, or how we should interpret it based on the bill. But my point is, I think this is going to impact a lot more bills because it's not a $1 million threshold. It's 1/5 of that. It's about a $200,000 threshold. So the number of regulations that will be implicated as a result is much higher. We were speaking to an agency just the other day who said the majority of the regulations are over the $1 million threshold, and they pass many regulations every year. So I'm very concerned about the number of bills that would be, the number of rules, that would be implicated by this bill. Are you aware, so Florida passed something similar to this about 10 years ago, maybe it was more than that. Are you aware that they have categorically exempted certain rules from the ratification process because they found the process to be too cumbersome and onerous?
I'm not sure how their bill has evolved over the last 14 years since it was implemented. I suspect that this will do the same as most of our laws do. I want to come back to the previous comment that you made about the $1 million. One, the cost of compliance for most things happens in the first year. So that's mostly front-loaded. And again, this is not appropriation costs from the General Assembly. This is the cost of Georgia citizens and business owners to comply with the regulations. So to the extent that there is an agency and most of their rules, as you said, are costing Georgia taxpayers over $1 million, I've got a lot of questions for that agency. And that's exactly what this bill is getting to the core of, because these are not government costs, which are actually indirectly paid for by taxpayers. These are direct compliance costs that we're trying to get to. And perhaps there are some people that are comfortable with agencies who are passing bills, the bulk of which cost Georgians more than $1 million. I'm not comfortable with that.
Could I continue my questions about the exemptions to Florida, Mr. Chairman, because I didn't get an answer on
So
that.
the fifth one, yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I did answer that, and that is that I don't know all the different machinations. I do know that the carve-out that we put in here with federal law is probably something similar to what they may have done. And so I think that we may, over the process, certainly this can be massaged.
Well,
Yeah.
just want to let you know that the Florida bill has exempted the federal, what's brought in by federal law, federal compliance, but they've also gone back and exempted individual bills, about over 20, and then categories of bills. And the reason for that was because they found that the process of going through ratification was more onerous and too onerous. And I find it quite ironic that this bill is supposed to deregulate and bring down red tape, as it says, but it's providing so much, it's causing so much additional regulation that they're actually walking the bill back in Florida.
Well, Representative, I would point out to you the fact that they haven't repealed the bill. And so, yes, they have tweaked their bill. A lot of legislation that we pass here gets tweaked, but they have not repealed the bill. And so, yeah, and you bring up a great point. If we know that we're passing a bill that is going to, and I can't even think of a theoretical bill, but there's a theoretical bill that we know is going to trigger that, we can put into that bill, since it will be signed later, that it does not, that this code section shall not, be required to comply with this code section. So we have the ability in the future, should we have the need to do that, to pull that lever. But I don't look at the fact that Florida has refined a piece of legislation as a reason to oppose it. I actually look at it as proof positive that they found value in it and that they're keeping it and they're working with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Number 15.
Yep. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I reviewed the 23 pages here, and I'm just really trying to capture the spirit of this bill. because on line 16 you said Red Tape Rollback Act. And so I'm just trying to identify what's the red tape, because 9 years ago when I became part of this body, our budget was $22 billion. Now we're $40 billion. So, Senator, can you please tell me, in the last 10 years, how many departments and agencies we have grown in this General Assembly in the last 10 years?
I suspect most of them.
I'm just saying, how many agencies are there? How many departments are there?
I don't know the exact number of agencies. I'm not sure the question you're asking me.
Yeah, the question is how many departments and agencies we have in Georgia. It's not a gotcha question. I'm just trying to figure out
I don't have
the
that
scope and
exact
scale here.
Sure. The scope and scale is that every department that is subject to the APA under current Georgia law would fall under the scope of this law. That's the scope of the law.
Right. So how many agencies and departments in Georgia fall that meets that description?
I don't
let
have
me
the
interrupt
exact
you. I'm
count of
sorry.
the.
Wait just a minute. You've asked, and
My question, Chairman,
he said he didn't know.
Oh, he didn't know the number
How many total agencies there are?
Right.
I think that's what he said.
So you say you don't know the number of
Correct.
agencies
Yes,
that meets
sir.
this description?
Okay, so
Correct.
that's
Okay,
three
so-
times you've asked him. Go ahead.
Right.
Sorry.
So that was my first question.
Okay.
If I may give a follow-up.
Yeah.
And so when I look at lines in this bill from 36 to 42, we're asking these agencies to identify 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that the spirit of this bill, to identify if there's red tape?
No, Representative. What the section of the bill that you're looking at is for the small business impact analysis, which is produced by the state auditor. And as you know, you've been here for 2 years longer than me. The state auditor actually works for us.
That's right.
And that is an office of the General Assembly. So we are asking the state auditor in the section of the bill that you're referencing, when requested, to produce a report that answers those 4 questions. So the agencies can certainly weigh into that process, but the agencies do not produce that report. The auditor would produce that report. So this is the section of the bill that I've referenced a couple times in this hearing as being akin to a fiscal note. So this is different from the section of the bill at the end that's the 4-year and quadrennial review.
Right. So you answered my question, because I'm familiar that this is only the small business section, but we don't have anything like this for the agency section. That this body is going to tell these agencies that we want you to identify the inefficiencies. So if we're going to do this for small businesses, my point is there's nowhere in this 23 pages that have a 1, 2, 3, 4 for the agencies. Because if that is true, the part that I'm looking for is litigation costs. We don't incorporate that too, because a lot of the laws and what the agencies are dealing with are litigation costs, will also negatively impacts our budget as well.
Representative, I would point you to line 404 to 412. And that's the 4-pronged test that we have for the agencies. It's a different list of considerations from what we have in lines 39 through 42 that you just referenced. And again, we're talking about 2 separate processes here, but as it relates to the every 4-year review, those are the 4 questions that we are asking the agencies to ask themselves. The 4 things that you pointed to are what would essentially be part of the small business impact analysis. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Number 17.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for this bill. I am thrilled that you are bringing this forward for sure. I certainly believe that it creates a strong incentive for agencies to demonstrate their value. And to Chairman Ballinger's point, I did, in my earlier years, brought the bill, Georgia's Government Accountability Act, which was called the Sunset Bill, and I based it on Texas and Florida. And in Texas, yes, it does cost more money, but for every dollar the state spent, they brought in $16. They were able to eliminate 42 agencies to abolish them. 53 agencies were consolidated or restructures, and at this point, well over $1 billion was saved by the state of Texas. My question to you with this bill, have the ability to abolish, consolidate, or restructure any of these agencies. And at the time, when I was doing the Government Accountability Act, there were already 132 agencies and departments that were named in my bill, and I believe...
Question.
I just asked my question.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't hear it. I apologize.
My question
I
is,
caught it,
Mr. Chairman.
I caught it.
Thank you.
There is nothing in this bill that would abolish or consolidate agencies. That would come about if it were to ever come about as a result of separate legislation. As we've had instances, certainly with boards, that we've done that already this year in the Senate side. I'm not sure if you all have had similar legislation or not, but no, this is not a bill that abolishes or consolidates any agency.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator, for being here and for presenting the bill. I just want to get some clarification on process. So I'm going to use House Bill 74. I just chose a random bill that has the line in it that says we will promulgate rules. That bill basically is about COAM machines, and it says that, and let me make sure I get it correctly. It says that the Georgia Lottery Corporation will promulgate rules, and and so forth and so on. My question is, for this ratification process, let's say they promulgate rules, and according to the rules that they promulgate, this is going to cost those vendors, COAM, the people who have the COAM machines, the licensees, all this stuff. It's going to cost them over $1 million. And so therefore, it's now got to go through this ratification process, if I'm correct. And then we come in here, we don't get the 2/3, it doesn't get ratified. And now we have a law in place that says that a thing is supposed to happen, but because the rule didn't get ratified, does that thing just not happen? Does the law now become moot? Like, how does that work?
So 2/3 would be a way that would get ratified without the signature of the governor. So essentially, it's a veto. It's a veto-proof majority at that point. If it was ratified, I think I understand the core of your question, which this is not it, but a majority then signature by the governor would otherwise pass that. But yes, you could have a scenario wherein the cost of compliance becomes something that was not understood, that the General Assembly would reject, and then there would need to be cleanup language around the underlying law to either change some elements of that law, or the General Assembly would need to swallow that expense at that given time, and then maybe come back and clean up the law with instructions to the agency to redo it with that in mind for a future year.
All right, so just a very quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. So basically what you're saying is this bill could make it to where other bills don't get implemented if, when going through this process, we end up where the rules, quote, cost too much. We could basically, this bill could undo the work that we're doing as legislators.
So I think that the General Assembly knew that I know that the General Assembly were passing a bill that they knew, and certainly a part of the legislative process, I think, should be to look at that cost of compliance. And if we knew that your House Bill 74 that you referenced was going to cost $20 million, then we can put in that bill that it is not subject to this regulation. And that would be the way that I think that we would preemptively be able to do that. I think, though, that opens the transparency window a little bit in a good way, such that there's a little bit of accountability there that, hey, we're passing a law that's going to be really expensive for these COAM operators to comply with, and we're going to raise that flag so that they know that as well, because certainly if that's in the bill, they will catch that, and that'll, I think, be part of the negotiation process for a piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Number 8.
Thank you for coming to talk to us, Senator.
Good morning.
For the record, I did vote no on the raw milk bill.
Did you?
Yeah, I did.
How many people did?
I don't know.
Did you know it was going to cost that much money?
Well, my point is that not all rules are bad. But anyway, just to the real question of this, I think that a lot of my colleagues are also expecting this sort of cognitive dissonance about this bill and its stated goals and its effect, that, while this looks to decrease administrative burden, it only adds more burden to agencies that are often underfunded and understaffed. To my reading, it grows government, increases that burden, increases bureaucracy. But to the lines that you've referenced before regarding the Department of Revenue, and I know that you have a refining amendment that you want to talk about. Maybe you can talk about it here, but lines 123 through 126.
Yes.
Can you discuss the concerns that the Department of Revenue had that made them ask for this amendment. And I understand that that concern was great enough that we were actually supposed to hear this bill last week, and it was delayed to add this amendment based on their concern. Can you explain to me how they came to you with that?
I would defer to the chair. I don't think that's the reason that we delayed the hearing. I think that there was another conflict. They came and had a casual conversation, just said, hey, there are a number of rules that we may need to implement that are a result of federal mandate that may get triggered here, and we want to make sure that we can implement those, and I certainly understand that concern. The way that I would suggest that we amend the current language, and I have a red line here so it's easy for me to see, I would strike on line 124 from the word of through the word rule, and I would strike the word as on line 125 and insert or is, such that it would read, provided, however, that no economic impact analysis shall be required of any proposed rule that is mandated by federal law or is a requirement for participating in or implementing a federally subsidized or assisted program. What that would do is it would remove the caveat for DOR, and it would just have that be standalone for any agency that was implementing a rule as a result of federal law, which I thought is what I had asked for, and that would be the intent of cleaning that up a little bit.
I understand. And we spoke with the Department of Revenue on this bill in specific yesterday, and of course, they could only speak for their own department and why they brought their concerns. They had mentioned that they were worried that this bill as written would delay the implementation of various regulations that they would need to carry out. They also estimated for them, just for that department, that the cost of the implementation, they estimated at about $1 million. And actually did count the number of agencies we have at present. I can text you that full list, but I counted 135 state agencies that would be affected.
I would point you to OCGA 50-13-2, which would be the agencies that would not be, just to make sure you subtract those because they're not subject to the APA. But yes, I'm sure that it's certainly in that ballpark.
How many are subtracted?
There's a whole.
It must be a smaller list. Than
It's
under 35.
It's probably.
It's okay if you don't have it.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if you knew it off the top of your head since it's
One or
your
two
bill.
dozen, maybe.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, State Senator, for working with our offices. I do want to say personally thank you for allowing us to do some of the amendments to strengthen the legislative body, because it is our job to oversee the regulations and rules. So I very much commend you for this legislation, this bill. I thank you for this. I just want to clarify the amendment you are proposing on the Department of Revenue. On lines 124, you're asking us to strike the words, the Department of Revenue or any proposed rule. And then line 125, we are adding or is where as was, correct?
I would say that the committee has a decision to make, and I am fine to go down either path. The first decision that you can make, maybe in response to Representative Au's statement before, is you could, what the current language would do as written is it was completely exempt DOR or any proposed rule that would then capture every agency. I don't believe that DOR was asking me to completely exempt them. I believe that they were asking me to exempt them in the case of implementing federal law, and I think that Joe is here and could clarify if I'm correct in that. If the committee wishes to completely exempt DOR and exempt agencies relative to federal rule, then I think you would keep this as is. If you want to just exempt federal compliance with federal law and otherwise have DOR be subject to this bill, then you would make the change that I recommended, which you captured correctly.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, the last thing we want is to start exempting agencies. So thank you very much for that bill.
Thank you.
Okay, look, we're down to, we're in this thing an hour. If it gets out of hand, I'm going to stop. We're going to try to let people ask one more question quickly. You have another question, 26?
Yes.
26.
Thank you. For your answer for the Department of Revenue, I met with them this morning, and they're good with everything in there, and that is the reason that they wanted to be exempt because of the federal guidelines. If they have to match those on tax codes and that kind of stuff, is what they said. And I think that's what they told you too. It's under the little issue they had there. Y'all got it fixed, and they're good to go with the bill now, correct?
So just to clarify, Representative, the current language in the code would completely exempt DOR and any other agency when they're complying with federal law.
No,
I didn't believe that's what they were asking me to do. So I don't know if Joe's here that wants to clarify. We can probably save some time on that if he is here. I saw him in the hallway earlier.
Oh, there, right there.
Hey, good morning. Morning, Chairman, members of the committee. Joe Snow with the Department of Revenue, and beside me is Kelsey Finn. So yes, I can confirm what the chairman is saying. We never came and asked for a specific carve-out for the Department of Revenue, so that is not what we were looking for.
And the only other point of clarification is we talked for. Sorry, yeah, I'm a little short. We were discussing federal legislation and state legislation. So most of our bills exceed the $1 million threshold because of Intuit, H&R Block, when they have to program and test different tax credits or tax changes. They often exceed that in aggregate. So that was the only clarification. But we really appreciate the Senator's assistance with this.
And I'll just add to that, as it was mentioned earlier, right, in Florida, changes have gone forward where this has been, certain types of legislation have been carved out, and if that's something that needs to happen in the future as we run into, if this bill moves forward and we run into a bunch of issues where H&R Block and all those changes are creating delays in implementation, that's definitely something that we can look at as well.
No, I have all due respect. I didn't know they were coming up here, so somebody, just number 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, very quickly, on line 387, under section 2.4, it talks about the process for the 4-year review, and that the governor shall establish and publish a schedule of review of all agencies. So I'm curious to know, you've mentioned that there is an exclusion for certain agencies according to the APA, and I'd like to know where in this bill that is specified. And also, what's your estimate of how many agencies would be reviewed on an annual basis of the 133 or 135? And
so to clarify, the APA is relative to the first section of the bill. And that's where we're capturing in that code section for the economic impact analysis. This section of the bill is not subject to the APA and would capture every state agency, including the constitutional officers, as referenced later on in that bill. So the second question was, I think it would be a quarter each year of whatever the number is. So take Representative Al's number and let's just call it 35 a year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am always supportive of tax cuts. I think I vote for pretty much everyone because I believe in reduced government. Did you talk to the Department of Audits about this? We talked about the IRS because they're the ones that are the Department of Revenue. The Department of Accounts and Audits, Greg Griffin, is the one that actually does the fiscal analysis. Have you talked to him, and has he said that there's no impact and I don't need to do a fiscal note?
We have had conversations, certainly with the state auditor, on this process. And again, the fiscal note, I think, would need to be inclusive of money that was saved as a result of this audit result of regulations that were pulled back. So when I say I don't understand how you would do an audit, what I mean by that is you're going to have to capture the expense and then also the savings, and that's completely subject to whatever rules get rolled back as a result of this, which I can't foresee what those are.
And that's what the auditor is for. That's like me going to the doctor and not knowing how they're going to do an angioplasty or whatever it is, and then saying I'm not going to do it because I don't. So at the moment, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to lay this on the table so I could have a conversation with the state auditor. That is in the form of a motion. Motion to table, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. Motion to table. I've got to talk to the state auditor.
You want to make a motion?
I have, yes, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion on the floor to table. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor of tabling, raise your right hand. Please have to count these. 7. Those opposed to tabling, raise your right hand. Eight. Motion failed. Okay, I'm gonna let y'all ask one more question. I got the people want to talk to the bill. That's what I've got lit up. We've got 3, 8, and 29. That's it for right now. Representative Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairman. So I know there's a big focus on this bill on small business impact, economic analysis impact, is around small businesses. Why are we focusing so much on businesses and not on the voters and the constituents of Georgia who are the ones who actually elect us to our office, not businesses?
Well, Representative, I don't know anybody who goes to work other than people that work for government that don't work for a business. And so to the extent that we want people to feed their families, I think we need to have an eye towards ensuring that people in Georgia have a place to go work.
So do you support a living wage?
I would need to see a piece of legislation, Representative. I wouldn't pontificate on something randomly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is actually a question for our friends at the DOR, if they don't mind coming back. Nice to see you again. Just to clarify something you said that the DOR, most of the rules that you deal with exceed the $1 million threshold for implementation. Is that correct?
Many of them will exceed that in compliance costs, yes.
So the reason that you had issue with the bill originally as written is that this requirement, the threshold is too low and that creates excessive burden on your agency? Is that?
It would just affect us with any regulation that stems from legislation, which most of us do. Most of
the rules.
For implementation, yeah.
Okay.
But as we stated, we really appreciate the Senator's assistance and his help trying to make this work for us.
You are one of 135 agencies.
Yes.
Understood. Thank you.
Number 29.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, at the proper time, I'd like to make a motion to pass.
I make a motion
We have a motion to do pass. We have a motion to do pass. We have a second. We have a motion to do pass and a second.
I make a motion to amend.
We have a motion to do pass. We have a amendment.
Striking line 125, the Department of Revenue or any proposed rule, and adding on 125 or add striking 21.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Striking the words, the Department of Revenue or any proposed rule on line 124, and on line 125, striking the word as and adding or is.
Was it? Yeah, is that the amendment we?
That's the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I think that if the intent was to essentially have a universal carve-out for compliance with federal law and not have a universal carve-out for DOR, that would accomplish, I think that's what Representative Horner's amendment is accomplishing. Alternatively, I think that you could, for DOR specifically, you could add a caveat to the existing language that said if they were complying with federal or state law, which I think gets to what Kelsey was speaking about, and that would allow them probably to capture the intent of what they were addressing as well.
You think that amendment addresses what they were trying to address?
I think that an amendment that would address what they were trying to address, and Ledge Council could help us craft this perhaps, it would be to say proposed rule of the Department of Revenue that is being implemented to comply with state or federal law, and then or any proposed rule that is mandated by federal law. I think that would capture what they were asking for and would certainly be agreeable to me.
We have a amendment. We have a motion. We have a motion to make amendment. Second.
Reading of the amendment.
Reading of the amendment, line 1. Excuse me. On line 124, striking the lines, the Department of Revenue or any proposed rule. Adding on 125, striking the word as and adding or is.
We have a motion and a second. Any all in favor of the motion? Raise your right hand. Help me count them here. And then 10 opposed. Raise your right hand. The amendment and the bill passed. I'm sorry, the amendment passed. Now we'll vote now, do what? Do I have to entertain taking an amendment? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After line 60, if the intent is to shine light on government, I would say that we should post these similar to what the fiscal notes are posted. So I would ask that these analyses also be posted in the same place that the fiscal notes are posted on the state website. That way anybody can see it, because right now, as a member of the General Assembly, it is extremely difficult to get reports that are given only to chairman. So if this intent is to help business owners such as myself and you, then I would say post that on the state website.
Say it again, please.
And I don't know the exact languages. I guess Legislative Council is not here, but I would say after line 60, I would add, I'm sorry. Hey, I'm looking at my bill. After line 60, I would say post, on the state website. This is not proper. I mean, but, this is a pretty big bill to be doing this at the last minute, but I would say post on the state website where fiscal notes are posted, but however Legislative Council wants to make that language, I would appreciate it.
Can you read what the amendment says?
Again, we've referenced, yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean,
If you have an amendment?
Sure. I would propose inserting after line 60 a new subsection B.1 that reads, a small business impact analysis requested pursuant to this code section shall be posted on the public website of the Department of Audits, or actually, shall be posted on the public website in the same manner as fiscal notes.
Can you read that again? I'm sorry.
A small business impact analysis requested pursuant to this code section shall be posted on the public website in the same manner as fiscal notes.
Mr. Chairman, can I modify that slightly? Because the small business impact analysis is already defined on line 47. So I would think all we would need is to say posted on the same place as the fiscal analysis, if Ledge Council thinks that makes sense, because we're saying the copy of the analysis shall be submitted to. Do we have to say that it's then shall be submitted to and posted on the website, or do we have to say? I'm fine with your amendment.
Have we got an amendment?
Are we okay with what I proposed?
I'm fine with your amendment.
Okay, all in favor of the amendment, raise your right hand. Amendment passes. Is that correct? Yep. Number 3.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to also make a motion for an amendment. I'd like to amend the bill to strike the entirety of section 2-4, lines 383 through 506. Which is the section around the auditing every rule for every 4 years.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor of the motion?
I think would be to discuss the motion. I don't know what he's trying to do.
Well, you just seconded it.
I know.
Okay, we have any discussion on the amendment?
Yeah, so this would strike the entire section that requires the audits every 4 years of every single rule and regulation.
That's pretty clear cut. He's striking it, so that's what I thought. But I thought maybe I missed something. We have a motion. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, raise your right hand. Left hand, one hand. Motion fails. Amendment fails. Motion fails. Okay. Number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the bill, friendly amendment here, just to run this by you. On lines 23 through 25, where I know we've made some changes there, but in the event that it may not be a proposed rule, or can we insert proposed rule, insert or amendment there on line 24, and then on line 125, mandated by federal law or agency regulations that may be being implemented. And then just for clarification, at the end of line 25 and 26, the federally subsidized or assisted program, I know there are some regulations that come particularly for the Department of Agriculture that may not bring any money with that. So I don't know if that needs to be reworded there or how we can try to address that in some way. So my recommendation would be to the author of the bill on line 124, or any proposed rule or amendment to that rule, basically is what I'm saying. And then line 125, federal law or agency regulation, and then trying to figure out whether we take out federally subsidized or assisted, or how we word that so that it's also clear that some of this rulemaking may not come with federal dollars, particularly for the Department of Agriculture. I was asking the author of the bill if he would be amenable with that as a friendly amendment.
Sure, if we can get that crafted in such a way that it captures your intent, I think I would, based on what you're saying, I agree with that would be a good addition.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, my motion would be to amend lines 123 to read line 124, or any proposed rule or amendment. Then on line 125, federal law or agency regulation. And then, Mr. Chairman, I need to get with the department to try to figure out the end of that sentence on line 126 so we can make sure we encompass what we need to.
I really like the way you approached that and asked the author if he would accept that. The end of it where she has to. But my point is, are we making that amendment?
Yes, sir. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll run outside and get with the Department of Agriculture, see how we can reword that, if that's appropriate, and bring that amendment to the committee.
I thought you said, but you did say legislative council to finish.
If Ledge Council would like to do that, I'm good with that, Mr. Chairman.
I think he was saying the agency, because I don't know what the agency is asking.
So within the Department of Agriculture, we know that there are programs that they may be helping to implement that that money may not flow from the feds. Mm-hmm. So in lines 125 and 126, we are saying, if I'm reading this correctly, mandated by federal law as required for participating in or implementing a federally subsidized or assisted program. The federally subsidized or assisted program, that doesn't accurately describe some of the rules that the Department of Agriculture may be implementing, because it may not be federally subsidized or assisted, and the state is picking up the cost of that.
Mr. Chairman, I would point out that Representative Horner's amendment changed that, and you guys voted on this amendment to read "or is required."
Okay.
Is a requirement.
All right.
So I think that your change would probably capture your intent, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that clarification. So I would just propose, Mr. Chairman, an amendment that would add lines or amendment to line 124. So it would read, or any proposed rule or amendment that is mandated by federal law or agency regulation as required for participating in. That would be in the motion, Mr. Chairman.
That's the way you understand it, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Whip?
I do.
We have a motion. We have a second on the amendment. Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the amendment, raise your right hand. On the amendment. On the amendment. Wait a minute. There's a question. I'm sorry. I jumped the gun here. I will not be able to.
Okay. Lake Council is saying that this amendment unwinds the First Amendment.
Just a couple of words.
I understand.
Just wanted to clarify. Okay, I just wanted to clarify to make sure we weren't undoing the First Amendment in any way with this amendment. So after proposed rule on line 124, we're adding or amendment. So it would read proposed rule or amendment that is mandated by federal law or agency regulation, or is a requirement for participating in or implementing a federally subsidized or assisted program. And that language would capture both of the amendments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to vote on the amendment again. We have an amendment and a second. With that clarification, all in favor of the amendment, raise your right hand. We got 10 or 11. All opposed, raise your right hand. All opposed to the amendment, raise your right hand. Number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move to amend the bill.
Beg your pardon?
I'd like to move to amend the bill.
Okay.
So given the testimony we heard from DOR about most rules costing over $1 million, and the testimony we heard from the senator about most costs being front-loaded, I would like to amend the section of the bill that calls for the $1 million threshold that triggers the ratification process. So at line 118, if the senator, I would like to change it to strike 1 million and increase it to 3 million, and delete on line 120 the 5-year period so that it's 3 million in the first year.
Does the chairman agree with that amendment?
Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, I don't think there's any magic to the $1 million number. I'd be amenable to the 3. I think keeping the 3 over 5 years, though, would be wise. It would triple the number that the Senate had passed.
Your answer is? Your answer is?
My answer is kind of.
His answer is what?
Kind of,
No. Do I have to accept this amendment?
Yeah.
Do I have to accept this amendment? Do I have to accept the amendment?
Yeah, the motion's already been made.
Okay. Gonna make a do I? I hadn't made a we have a second? I apologize. I've seen so many lights here. I've lost my train of thought 15 times, and I do appreciate all you people. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I would be happy to withdraw the amendment and reissue the amendment given the senator's feedback, if that would be helpful.
Yes, go ahead. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
thank you. So I would amend to change line 118, strike 1 million and insert 3 million.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Have a motion and second. All in favor of the amendment, raise your right hand. I'll count these for me, please.
You're not.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, can you raise your hand high, please? Thank you.
I got, let me move things.
Motion I can't hear. Tell her. Motion, the amendment passes.
Motion.
We have
Motion for the original question, which is the original bill. Motion for the bill.
a motion for the original bill?
Motion for the original question.
Okay, we have a motion for the original question.
It's not, we're moving.
By substitute.
We're moving.
As amended. As
By
amended.
substitute, as amended.
Is that not correct? As amended? Yeah. Motion for the original bill as amended. We have a motion? Second? All in favor of the amendment, of the motion, say aye. Raise your right hand, it won't work.
Are you voting on the bill now?
Yes. Yeah. As 10. All opposed, raise your right hand. Okay, am I allowed to say the bill does pass? And I apologize for my inability to keep up with what was going on, but it got kind of...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Okay, Chairman Harbin, we are behind the 8 ball. We have to leave here in about 25 minutes, and we want to make this as quick as we can. It's a very important bill, and again, thank you for bringing this bill. And this will be Senate Bill 46, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. SB 46 is entitled Government Serves the People's Act. I don't know about you, but we all serve our constituents. And the calls you get sometime, the one I got this morning was, I called an agency, they put me on hold, they dropped me. The service is the issue, and this bill is about service. This person says I was transferred to a number that said it was no longer connected. Those are the types of things that we see, that we serve ultimately our constituents. I made a call the other day, got no live person at the other end at all, and then called my liaison, and they texted me and said, email me what you want. And I said, that's not exactly what I was looking for. Well, in your folder, I mentioned these up front. There is a white paper called Government Serves the People that should have been in your folder, and there is also a fiscal note as well on that on the bill. So I know that came up at the last, so I said we'd go ahead and do that. But you should have, this was sent over yesterday. If it's not, I'll get it back. We'll get it to you as far as that. If you will, I'm going to try to take line by line. I think government is interesting in this, is that in a business we look at profit, and that's kind of what drives an entity as far as that. But what really is all about is service. I believe that service is what drives businesses. It's what makes things happen. And that's the part that this bill really is about. And it's about service to ultimately, our ultimate customer is our citizens, and that's what this is about. The numbers that I've been given, we have some 80,000 employees in the state of Georgia that work for government in some form or fashion. 80,000. We have 80 plus agencies that are affected. If you will, look at the bill, and I'm going to kind of take it line by line, if you will, in what goes on and what this bill is attempting to do. In lines 36 through 37, what we're going to do, we're using GTA, Georgia Technology Association, to be the, I'm going to call it the quarterback that's going to run what's going on. They have the technology capabilities. I believe they have the skills to help us put this together. They will appoint a state of Georgia government service delivery lead. That person is responsible for looking at the agencies that we're going to look at, mainly for service. For instance, what's the average time on hold? Is there a methodology that if somebody's on hold, if we look at Chick-fil-A or Delta or whoever, they give you options. How do we make that happen in such a way? And what we're trying to do is to have somebody who will quarterback that, and that's really what lines 36 through 37 is that. They're to facilitate, in 38, they're to facilitate implementation. In service delivery, they're to develop a statewide service standard. They're to gather an analysis of quantitative and qualitative data on service performance. They are collaborate with experts and stakeholders to identify and implement what we call a best practices. Most businesses have a best practice of what you expect. I run a business. I want to know how many calls somebody handles. I want to know how long they had to wait on hold. I want to look at the data that's there, and that's what really GTA would be doing for us is looking at the data and then having each agencies. If you look at on 71 through 94 is the responsibility of each state agency. And what we're asking there is each state agency would take one of their senior people and they would be designated and appointed as a lead agency service delivery official. And they would be the ones that would comply back and forth with GTA in the issues that are there, and they would make their reports to them. We have exempted the Board of Regents within the university systems. They are totally exempted. What would happen, and this is just the framework to get started with, as far as that, you'll find that it's not heavy definitive, but we're trying to get that done, is this, that every year in lines 110 through 114, there would be an annual report to the legislature and to the governor of what they see as far as the agencies. And I believe that's critically important to understand. If one agency is lagging behind, that doesn't mean we don't like them or whatever. It's to help them be better. And I just see that as far as that. One implementation in my business was to record phone conversations. What we found is this: it changed the time on the phone. It changed having to get back with someone. And that's where GTA has that technology side of it that they can help us do that. Here's what I see very hard. It's very hard to measure or to manage what you can't measure. And what I see is this, is that this takes it takes GTA as the quarterback and says, hey, here's what this department's doing. Maybe it's the Department of Revenue, which does a good job. And we have agencies that do an excellent job. But I will give you this, I've gotten calls on licensing, for instance, where somebody's waiting 6 months to get a license response, and I can make a call and it finally happens. There's something stopped up there that needs to be dealt with. And this bill is really it's about servicing and helping them service with technology. Here's the other part that I will tell you that I got calls. We all say, well, email me, text me, do whichever. But we have a whole percentage of the population that has no email. They have no technology. And so we also need to be sensitive to that, and how do we handle those people as well. That's the other part. But the bill, I will give you this. I talked to Blake Tillery, who is the head of appropriations. He was my third signer on the bill. Is this, how do we make government better? And that's really what this is about. It's not to, how do I say you're a bad person, but it's saying, hey, this agency's doing this agency's doing that. And we've got great people in the state, many places, but we've got some places that are, that need assistance. And this is a way that we can measure that part of what's going on. I know that time is short, so I'll give you the short version. I'll give you more detail as needed, sir.
Thank you for that. And of course, I've already shown everybody I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. We're not going to let this one get near as confusing on the old bald-headed man's part. I guess I look at this and wonder, to show you how non-intelligent I am, I thought this was something they should already be doing. And so that shows you I don't know what's going on, because I would figure that the departments would already have a mechanism of making sure they were returning their calls and so forth and being more efficient. So we're going to take a few questions. I asked again, we have a speaker that's going to speak to the bill, and I want to be as quick as we can and give you guys time, plus the speaker that signed up to speak. Representative Sanchez.
That's me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong. Number one.
Me. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator, for bringing the bill. I appreciate the objective and goals of the bill. I'm just curious, because during the appropriations process, we often hear that a lot of our agencies are understaffed and underfunded. And so this bill would create a new position, one person, I'm assuming, that would now, that would, I guess, be involved in improving service delivery. But what if the issue isn't necessarily not the right technology? What if the issue is just you've got 10 people trying to answer phone calls for 1,000 Georgians?
I think that's where GTA can come in, because there are call centers that they monitor and deal with. And there's a lot of technology, like I mentioned, is that when there are rushes of calls coming in, is there an alternative to gather the data to call them back at a convenient time, just like Delta does many times, which is fantastic. I think that's the part, because I don't think many of the smaller departments especially have the technology experts that GTA does, that they can come into a smaller department and they can say, hey, here's what you can do. And this is not a once and done process. I think it's it's working over time to get better at what we do. And it's not going to be, instantaneously as far as that. It would take a full-time person with GTA to kind of quarterback that. Our desire is not to add to the other departments, but to have a person who's responsible and to try to gather as much data as we can electronically first, and that's really where their expertise is, and then aid each of those departments with the information.
All right, really quick follow-up. When we do this, if the answer to service delivery is we need more people, even if there is some technology that can help with that, there's only 24 hours in a day, right? And so even if we can call people back and the wait time is 9 hours, that's still not necessarily delivering for our constituency. So my question with that is, the fiscal note that's in this bill specifically addresses personnel, like hiring of a person and what comes into play with that. But it sounds like long-term, there's going to be a fiscal impact on departments because they're going to have to purchase some type of technology. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's a possibility if that's what it takes to correct. And what we've seen is each department has different needs. Some are more advanced than others as far as that portion. So we see that. The other part that was discussion with the GTA even is after hours. Of the 80,000 people, we've got people that are working remotely, working at home even. And maybe what we need to look at is an after hours process that would be there so that when someone doesn't have to quit work or get off of work to get their problems solved, when we could have something available. So I think that's the type of thing that we need to just work together. I think if we work together, we make it better, and GTA would be the quarterback to help us get that done.
Thank you. The possibility of it may create and probably would create a position, but it may be somebody that's already there that to handle it. Number 27.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your comments on the licensing boards, and that's been a big one. But
you felt your pain on that, right?
Wow, it was tough. What about the reasoning behind exempting Board of Regents?
They already have some specific, we have limitations there, and we did not feel like that we could go into that arena constitutionally, is what we were told.
At the proper time, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. Certainly interested in seeing how we can continue the long-range strategic planning of technology and efficiencies. I'm curious, though, right now GTA seems to have this responsibility already, and I have taken the time to look at their strategic plan for 2025, and they have identified 5 key areas detailing exactly what this bill purports to do. So I'm curious to understand why the redundancy in terms of, if you feel it's redundant, why the redundancy in this new position and a new head for every single one of our 133 agencies. If you don't feel it's redundant, how it will be different from what currently GTA is mandated to do?
First of all, we are not trying to add at this level an additional one for every department. We want to add a position for GTA only, and that's going to be our quarterback. We want to try to use the existing people that are there. Secondly, in that respect, is that yes, they do, but there's not a report directly to the legislature. There's not a report that comes to us that says this is what this department, where they are compared to other departments, that comes to us that I've seen. You may have seen something different. And I think even to the governor, is that it's a great tool, especially from an executive position. It's like, I've got 4 departments in my business. I can look at the data and see what they're doing based upon transactions and things of that nature. So I think it gives it a little more clarity from that standpoint and a little more accountability back to us as well.
Thank you. We're going to hear from GTA.
Yeah.
So if that's the relation of your question, that might be better.
Yeah.
Number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. I think this is a good bill, and I'm going to be happy to vote for it when that time comes. I have a question about the bill's passage out of the Senate. I saw you guys pass it out on the 3rd of March, and it passed pretty handily, 51-4. I did notice, though, that of the 4 no votes, 2 of them are actually top signers on the bill. Can you explain what that's about?
We have a caucus. They said I talked too long in presenting the bill at the well, and they voted no on me just to aggravate me more than anything else. So that was the secret to that, because they were the signers on the bill too.
Okay, so they were
Good observation.
I noticed things. Just also
Not that that would happen anywhere
Senators
else.
Dolezal and Anna Vitarte on your bill. Thank you.
Thank
Good answer. Kind of.
You're Miss Flag, camera flag. I thought it was you.
I was over there earlier, then I moved over here.
Okay.
Keeping you on your toes.
My apology again. Showed you. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee. I'm Cameron Fash. I'm Director of Government Relations at the Georgia Technology Authority. We share Senator Harbin's passion for customer service. Our Executive Director, Shanzia Thomas, who's also the state CIO, customer service is one of her top priorities. It has been since day one. And so while I'm not here to speak in opposition to the bill, I am asking that we have more time. I know the session is late, but we are committed to customer service. We share those commitments. But I think there's a lot of stuff that GTA and state agencies are working on that I think address this already. So if I can I'm going to be as brief as I can to touch on this. The state already has 6 call centers at GTA, DDS, DHS, Department of Revenue, Secretary of State, and DNR. Those agencies and those call centers are already tracking the volume of calls, reject rate, abandonment rate, average speed of answer, handle time, and after work call time, or after call work time, as well as internal metrics that they may be capturing as to what the issue is. Our digital services team at GTA works with over 70 agencies to serve their customers. The Georgia.gov AI chatbot sees 20 to 25,000 interactions per month. Our analytics page, this is a public page. I encourage all of y'all to take a look at it. It's analytics.georgia.gov. Every website and web page that's on our Georgia.gov platform, we know how many page views they have. We know where they're going. We know what device they use, what browser type, operating system. But also every state website has a score for their accessibility based off federal guidelines, so we know, is it user-friendly? But also the readability, so we know if it's at a 7th or 8th grade level or a college level. So we're trying to make sure that whatever information people or the constituents are seeking, it's available to them. And then also we have surveys that we can plug into every single one of our websites on our platforms. We work with agencies to identify what the information they need to capture, what they are going to do with that information once they have it, and why are people struggling? How can we help them? We want to make sure that the information we get is actually put to use. So I say all that to get back to the bill. There's kind of 2 tracks the bill can take. One, at a minimum, is the state customer service lead at GTA, and then we work with every agencies to identify those concerns. I think we're already doing that to some degree, and I'll say no matter how good we're doing now, it can always be better. We understand that. We're not complacent. But we think at a minimum, that's with the fiscal note, I think it's about $400,000 to achieve that. If we were to engage a corporate partner to work with surveying and all that, we've talked to one vendor, won't mention names because it doesn't really matter at this point, but it was an estimate it could be $4 or $5 million just to do the surveys. So we understand and value that we need to know what needs to be fixed. But if we're going to invest in those resources, can we invest it in the areas that to be fixed, if that makes sense? So I don't, Senator Harbin and I, we've had some very good conversation. I really appreciate him allowing us to just have that honest conversation. But we think we have a lot of this in place. I think we just want to tweak some things a little bit, make sure we're on the same page so that
our customers and your constituents get their answers resolved in the manner in which they deserve and expect.
So you've already discussed this with Arthur, all those things?
We've had some conversations, and I think we're,
Okay.
you know, my bosses, I think we're trying to get on the calendar tomorrow to work on some things. So again, I'm not trying to derail the process. No, it's late in session, but I think we'd like to have more conversation around this.
I'm gonna take 3 questions. Okay. Number 8.
Thank you for coming to testify. With respect to the surveys and the necessity and cost of the surveys, what do you think about Senator Harpin's point that you do need to be able to measure something first before you're able to directly fix it? Do you think that survey helps with that targeting?
I do think, no, I don't disagree with that having the metrics and knowing what needs to be fixed is important. Now, with our current limitations that our surveys we can conduct now are through the websites. So call centers are separate. But some of that information is tracked, and I think if you were to go to the call centers and say, I can't speak for them, but I imagine they do have data as to what the issues were. What was the holdup? Were they just not have access to it? Was the person not able to address that concern? Maybe they were overwhelmed. You know, we rely on technology a lot, but we understand there's still plenty of people who want to do the person-to-person contact. So we're not debating the need for the data. I just think that its potential cost, I think, really is kind of getting us now to the call side of things. It would also do, I think, maybe some web applications, but that's some of our concern. It's just that adding another layer of this may just give us the information we already know.
15.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your presentation. So I'm just curious, you said we already have call centers. What are some of those calls or complaints or the nature of those calls that you're receiving right now?
Right, so
at a high level.
Yeah, so I mean, if you go to 1-800-GEORGIA, which is through GTA as an agency, a lot of this is kind of your first stop. Their job is to get you, the constituents, in touch with the correct agency on that first call. They don't have any abandonment rates because they stick through and make sure every call is answered. But as you know, DDS is going to have theirs with driver's license issues, DHS, you know, revenue with tax issues. Certainly this time of year, they're receiving plenty of calls, and then Secretary of State for elections, DNR for others. So there's a whole host of reasons people can be calling, and those are just for call centers. People certainly can call an agency up if they have specific concerns, but those are the ones that really deal with it in bulk.
Number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the presentation. You said you needed more time. How much time do you need?
Well, I do think this is something that potentially could be after session. I don't know that, but it really comes down to an agreement of what we have in place. Does it satisfy the needs going forward? And so we're not complacent. We understand that we want to invest and improve. I think it's just.
What are you asking for? How much time?
Well, I mean, I think if we came back next session, we could still work on it.
Thank you.
But I mean, we defer to your leadership.
Number 21.
Thank you, Senator, for bringing us this bill. At this time, I want to make a motion for due pass.
Have a motion due pass, second? Second. Have a motion and a second?
Got a motion.
I don't have to take a motion. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Any further discussion?
Just real quick discussion.
You want?
Real quick discussion.
Okay.
If the concern
If the concern of the committee is to get you comfortable, is it possible to make the effective date, a later date, so that we'll give you next session to work over the summer? So basically add an effective date at the very end, say effective as of January 2027, and that way if you decide that you want to change something, or make it 26 June, whatever that date is, that way the agency can then get comfortable with it over the summer. That's a question for the author. Would he be open to an amendment to add an effective date that pushes it back a little bit to give him some time to?
It begins in 2026, and it's going to take them a while to get it set up and running from that standpoint. I think the other part that I would say, great analytics and data for computers, but when you look at the percentage of our citizens that are 65 and over. I think we also have to look at, that's where the call centers and the responsiveness is there is critically important. And I think this just gets us started. This is not a final project. I think we will come back and make amendments to it. But I think it's the start of how we get things moving.
I have a motion and second.
Quick discussion, sorry.
We have to get out of this room, so.
We got 10
But-
minutes.
Question's been called. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of passing the bill, raise your right hand. How many? All opposed, same sign. Bill passes. Well, that's legal.
Right, we pulled a lot of that data already.
I'm just going to send it off. I need that.